Are we live?
Sure.
And is this what they're seeing on YouTube right now?
Well, it's still trying.
Yeah, it hasn't. Why is it not connecting streaming software to go live? Viewers will be able to join.
It might just still see that, but
No, we should see it here, right? Is it? We're not live right now.
no. Yeah, you are. Yeah, you
That's
are.
it. Excellent.
But
Connecting streaming software to go live. Viewers will be able to join. Yeah, turn off that. We have a few minutes in between here, tried to add some time to buffer, but I just want to point out a few things. If you didn't hear me before, there's some snacks and beverages and donuts in the back. There's a QR code right up here. If you link to that, it will take you to the OAC webpage that has the paper order and all the abstracts for the papers. I didn't print them all out for you today. So we have a mix of live paper one pre-recorded page that will play and 2 folks who are joining us live to present virtually. That's why this has been a little bit of a complicated day, and we're hoping that everything works flawlessly. But as I tell my students, the word of the day is flexibility, right? If we can't make something work, we'll just carry on and we'll sort it out later, right? So you can follow the QR code to get to the program. I should be doing this in front of here for the speakers now that this is back on. Sorry about that, y'all. We have an hour and a half for lunch today, and Brad Lepper, who I don't see here yet, but hopefully is coming or maybe is joining us virtually, has graciously arranged for all of us to have free admission to the Ohio History Center to go see the terrific new exhibit on the Hopewell earthworks. If you've not been there, it's well worth it. If you go to the museum over lunch or at the end of the day today, simply mention that you were at the Ohio Archaeological Council meeting and they will let you in for free. If you are having trouble finding the exhibit, it's kind of tucked away in a corner. If you walk straight back past the camper and turn to the left, you will find it there. And it's well worth spending a little bit of time to go see that. The business meeting will start on around 3 o'clock, and that is for members only. So we will stop the YouTube live stream at that point. We will switch over and we'll have a Zoom link for people who are joining us remotely, but that Zoom link is only for the business meeting part today. And finally, I'd like to say thank you for everybody who came out today to support this. I wasn't sure if we were going to get 3 people or 75 people, but this is perfect. And I know there are folks online, so hello to all of you as well. And I would like to say a big thank you to Jessica Clark, who helped set this up, to Jamie here, who's running the tech, and to Eric Olson for forcing us to do this and learning all this tech on our own so that we will be even more prepared for this next time. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and get set up for our first presenter today. Our first presenter is Jonathan Bowen. I've arranged these papers to be sort of in chronological order. We have some historical archaeology papers first, and then kind of moving into the prehistoric realm. So there's a little bit of a method to my organization here. So I'm going to stop and we're going to get this going. And Jonathan, if you want to come on up, we'll get your slides ready. This is a little bit of a weird setup. So I'm going to, your slides will be streaming up here. I'm just going to move mine out of the way. Yes, there you go. So give me just a moment. Yes. We don't need the Zoom link open just yet. We'll do that at the break. Okay, I want to close out my PowerPoint. Close that one. All right, Jamie, I'm going to need your help for a minute here. I told you this is going to be taking just a moment. And for those of you who are online at home right now, we will be right back with you. All right. All right, Jamie, can we just put this up on the screen, please? A pointer here that will allow you. It should work for the slides on this, and there. If you push the green button, so if you push the green button, you'll get a pointer. And theoretically, once you get those up there, put a slideshow. I think. Let me just try this really quickly. Yes, it'll just forward and backward. Forward.
Which one's the pointer, please?
Pointer is the green button.
Okay, being colorblind, but it's the one with that little up and down thing.
Forward and backward.
Okay.
And if you just step here, we've got the audio coming on here. You won't necessarily, if you want to see them on here, we can also pull it up.
Oh, that shouldn't be necessary.
All right, if you can see them from here, and we can put the lights down just a little bit in the front, perhaps.
And I do have my handy dandy 20-minute.
Excellent. Yes, I was.
So even if it seems that I'm not, when the time is,
I advance.
If the time is going too quickly, I go to the last slide and give people, and I just say thank you. So
lovely. I'm going to step out of your way.
Anyway.
All right. So I think, is it set up, Jamie? Is it ready? All right, you may go.
Thank you, Beth. And as Beth said, my name is Jonathan or Jeb Bowen, and I'm from the Pickaway County Historical Society's Clark May Museum in Circleville. Today, as the first slide shows, we're going to be discussing the Schneider Farms locality, which is located just on the Saddle River, just north of Circleville, Ohio. And let's advance the, see, I need to point this at something. This, that. Oh, point it right at the.
Yeah, that's connected.
Oh, it's there. There we go.
All good.
There. I learned slowly, as all of you know that have known me for years. Anyway, so what we're talking about right now is you can see this map of the southern Ohio area, and the big yellow dot in the middle is where the Schneider Farm is located, south of Columbus here. And let's see if I can advance this now, if I've learned it correctly. Perhaps, perhaps not. Let's see.
I must have the magic touch. Let me see for a minute.
Golly, I must be anti-magnetic or something.
Just right there on that button. You may have been pushing the other one.
Oh, that's right. I was doing the, I learned so slowly, as all of you that have known me, I was doing the pointer. The pointer does not advance. That's our lesson for today. Pointers do not advance slides. Anyway, thank you, Beth. Thank you very much. Anyway, now, this particular slide here, as you can see, it's oriented with the north to the right-hand side of the slide, so we could get the most of the Saddle Valley on the slide on this Google Earth slide here as possible. And you can see the great big yellow dot in the middle is 33 PI 845, or the Schneider Farms and North locality on the east side of the river. Now, I want to mention, let's see, basically the Schneider Farms. Yes, the Schneider Farms. A good question is, well, what is this? Who has it? The Schneider family, and particularly our good friend and generous donor to the museum, Joe Schneider. They own several tracts all the way from the Pickaway Plains south of Circleville, almost up toward the mouth of the Big Walnut Creek, Walnut Creek, north of Circleville. The tracts are along the Saddle River, and of course, now that would be many thousands of acres. In the tracts are, as you might guess, discontinuous holdings, but the whole thing's united into the Schneider Farms complex, and the family has avidly, and Joe have avidly collected artifacts over the decades, and they've filled out numerous Ohio archaeological inventory forms regarding the things found in their properties. So Joe and his family have been exemplary stewards of the past, for which we thank them profusely. The Schneider and the family and Joe have also donated several large collections from several of the localities on their farm holdings to the Clark Museum, for which we thank them a great deal. Now, we're talking about Site 845. Rather than a discrete archaeological site, it's really a sampling tract, about a 15-acre field. And about 15 years ago, for several years, Joe, with the moldboard plow, worked it over with the moldboard plow, and the artifacts really started coming up. It was farmed that way over several years, and they got thousands of artifacts from hunting it intensively when it was being moldboarded. I've asked Joe, what's so special about the 845, and he says, well, really, nothing today that he can see, except that the river is a bit more accessible, at least today, without climbing down a steep bank at that 845 tract than it is for a little ways up and down the river. But of course, that could have changed. So there's really no obvious big attracting thing for a prehistoric use of that area, except that it is, a nice spot along the Saddle River. Now, let's see where Smart Boy has even laid that's terrible. Oh, here it is. Yes, those of you that know me know that I get worse every day, so I can't hide that. No, can't hide that fact. And okay, now moving moving right along, and before many of you were born, but many of you here are also Dr. Dancy students from the Ohio State University. When I started at Ohio State in the mid 1970s, Dr. Dancy was my advisor, and he was really pushing the so-called sightless survey approach that him and a Dr. Dunnell had had developed. And basically, what it is, at least to me at the time, sightless survey, the term almost, to be honest, almost sounded like boring. But what Dr. Dunnell and Dr. Dancy were really pushing was extensive survey, getting good control over the entire landscape in an area, in a region. Also comprehensive, making sure that you got representative samples from all areas within that region. High resolution, basically, piece plotting everything like the whole region was one archaeological site. And although that wasn't possible in the mid 70s, getting everything GIS or Geographic Information System analytically ready. And but poor Dr. Dancy had the difficulty of me being his advisee in the 1970s, in the 1980s, and in the 1990s for 17 years. I think I do hold the distinction of being the longest student in the program, but actually I did end up graduating. But yes, 17 years. Him and also the last couple of years, Dr. Yerkes that came as my advisor, but anyway, their sightless survey approach of basically treating a region as one archaeological site with activity areas that you had to have control over really made a profound impression on me. But to be honest, at the time, I thought that approach was just a big bother. But the older I've gotten, the more I realize that Dr. Dancy, Dr. Yerkes, Dr. Sumner, all my professors from the 1970s were a lot more intelligent and a lot more with it than I thought at the time as a cocky young man. Yes, they were right. So, salute to all of them. Anyway, let's be moving on. Oh, and I would like to mention that all of the data from this whole area are available to anyone upon request. And I really am pushing and inviting anyone that has students or students themselves, if they just, get a hold of me. There are many research projects that would be your own projects that you're, more than welcome to work on, and we'll provide, any necessary data, at your disposal. Okay, let's just start advancing through slides in a lot more quick manner now. The rest of the time, we're going to be showing, finally, some artifact pictures. Hooray, hooray. Anyway, speaking of the so-called sightless survey, here is 845. I guess that's kind of bluish in the middle there. And that's basically the area from South Bloomfield down to Circleville along the Saddle River and with some of the uplands there. And many of you in the room have certainly contributed, data to this, but you can see that's where the archaeological sites, or really a better term would be, that's where our best representative tracks from which we have good samples are located. And one thing about this approach, you can see several areas that are glaringly deficient of samples. So we can see where we certainly need more samples, because one thing I should also mention, go to Dr. Dancy's office and say, oh, look, Dr. Dancy, we found this real neat stuff at this site. And he'd say, show me where it is on the map. I'd say, there, Dr. Dancy, there. Then he'd say, well, that's very nice. However, Then his finger go over, how about this area? How about that area? How about that area? You can't understand what you have here unless you understand the whole thing. And after the decades, it finally made a big impression on me. Okay, but on to the artifacts and things here. Okay, this just shows the area from, again, north is to the, on the right of the map. We can see it's basically the southern suburbs of of Columbus. You can see the airfield for the Rickenbacker base there, down to Chillicothe on the left. The big thing that looks like Yellow Highway is the Hocking drainage that is out of this project area, but it just shows some of our sampling tracks. Anyway, moving right along. Okay. Anyway, this is the study area that we're trying to get the GIS control over, and in the sampling tracks, basically from the south edge of Columbus down to Portsmouth, and then on the east up to Jackson and in Wellston. And let's see, let's go. Okay, now just a quick list of some of the artifact types from the Schneider Farms North here. You can see from 9,000 to about 700 BC, we have this. Well, I mean, you can read them yourself. I won't read them out loud now. And then 7,000 to 4,000 BC, about 6 different points. But then, moving right along, of the middle to late Archaic, side-notched Radix Osceola points, about 12. Of the Matanzas, about 9. Brewerton points, 18. Heavy stem, 10 points. But now the so-called Riverton, so-called bird points, that's the largest concentration of them at Schneider Farms North. This family recovered 49 of those. And we'll have the pictures in a second. Lists aren't all necessarily that interesting. Also a significant early woodland and Hopewellian area, as you can see. And yes, indeed, if a certain gentleman that's looking at me has time, it looks like Joe would be, conducive to seeing if he can get this field is not in the family in his right now, but if he can get access for magical geophysics, yes. After 10,000 other projects that the gentleman in front of me is working on, yes. Anyway, you can see late woodland Nevada points, 19 of them, a big deal there. And also big Fort Ancient site, 37 Fort Ancient triangles. And it goes all the way up to the 1400s to 1600s Madisonville period. One of the diagnostic Madisonville terminal prehistoric, protohistoric end scrapers. But on to some artifact pictures. As I look at the stopwatch, okay, the family did save all of the chippage and debitage and everything. So we have a real good picture of what's there flint production-wise and also tool maintenance-wise. Okay, the oldest one, a nice high-low paleo point in the collection. Different of the early archaic types in the collection. Okay, some of the, do I need to pause or anything there, Beth? Okay. Okay, and I can see in the about 4 minutes and 10 seconds I have left here, yes. Anyway, some of the middle to late archaic Matanzas-like points. And some of the more Brewerton typey things, and some of the side-notch Radix Osceola points. These have been shattered, but still treasures, as we all know. And some of the stemmed lanceolate points. And some of the many Riverton-like so-called bird points from Schneider Farms North. And there were three three-quarter grooved axes from the late Archaic period that the Joe and the family recovered. And two of these, what I always called bell pestles, but Dr. Dancy, with his Washington State perspective, always said, Jonathan, they're handballs. So, bell pestle slash hand molds from the late Archaic, two of those. And a very scarce in this area, more characteristic of the northeastern United States. One of the maybe 3,000-year-old or so half-grooved adze that they recovered. And a good old forest notch variety of what often we might call an Ashtabula point around here. And again, a significant Hopewellian occupation there. About four of the four bladelet cores, and about nearly 90 of the prismatic bladelets. And a minority of the Hopewell artifacts and the points and preforms are made out of the good old St. Genevieve or so-called Indiana hornstone from the greater southern Indiana area. And a Hopewellian flared bit celt that Joe and his family found. And a, who knows how old it is, but a pecked out, a so-called a chisel that Joe and his family found. And again, three of the many Levana points, and one of the very many Fort Ancient triangular points. And looky here, we have just about 1.5 minutes left for the final remarks, so everything is working out. Anyway, just 2 points I want to make yet that'll be about 30 seconds each. Number one, myself personally and everyone at the Pickaway County Historical Society's Clark May Museum want to profusely thank Joe Snyder and his family for all their help and teaching over the years. Congratulate them for their careful curation and immaculate cataloging of their artifact collection, and also of their very generous donation of many of their artifacts to the museum so they can be on display for everyone. Also, again, as my last 30-second point, I want to emphasize to everyone, I want to beg everyone, there's a zillion from this entire research area, and from this site in particular, there's a zillion research projects for professionals and for students, and truly we'll just turn the data over to you. It would be truly your own projects. There's plenty for everyone. So anyone that would like to work on any of the data from here in Columbus down to Portsmouth and Jackson Wellston, just let me know, and we'll get you set up in your own research project with our support and thanks. At that, it's time to thank Beth very much, and it's time for Jeb to clear the podium. Thank you all.
So much.
I'll take just a moment to move through. And next up, we have Robert Chester, who's presenting. And you sent me your. Did you upload your slides? I did upload it. I'm looking. Wait, I got to find the mouse back here. Jamie, do you want to configure the mouse? Oh, I see it. I just got to get the mouse back over here. All right, we just need to stop sharing his slides. Hang on just a minute. All right, Jamie, how do we get these ones down? Oh, we're just going to close it out. We're just going to close it, right? And then we're going to want to do these ones, right? While we're setting this up, I do want to let y'all know there are restrooms here. If you go out those doors and up the little set of stairs and turn left, there's restrooms, and that's also where you pay the thing. Yep.
Is it possible, I think the formatting's going to be screwed up. Is it possible to have it directly on the laptop?
Yes, I can probably do that. Just download it. Where did it go? I'm gonna stop doing that. Device is ready. Hang on, I'm gonna download this. Yeah, that's fine. Let's just pull up his PowerPoint. It's gonna take a quick minute here. It's thinking.
Yeah, whatever version of PowerPoint we use in the office doesn't play well with other
That's good to know.
websites.
Right now it's gonna open up. Can you move the image so that it's up in the? Yeah, we're gonna. Okay, go right ahead. Okay. And then this one, there's a pointer on the bottom that will advance the slide once you're in the slide mode. We had to move the picture over because it was right in the middle. All right, and then Jamie, I need the mouse back for a moment. Where did it go? Gonna enable editing, and we're going to. Oh, it's doing that thing. It'll work. It's showing it differently here, but yes, there you are. All right, is it ready to go? We're back up, and can you make that just a little bit smaller also? One more second. It's just doing it that way. Don't even question it. Can you make that smaller? And then we'll be ready to go. Thank you.
All right.
All right, we got this.
All right. Good morning.
Yep. Go right ahead. Thank you.
So I need to start with a disclaimer. I had nothing to do with this project. I got to sit by looking on in envy as Kate and Maura had all the fun while I was churning out Section 106 compliance reports. But this was a really cool project to watch from the sidelines because it's not a kind of project that Mannequin Smith does very frequently. The city of Shaker Heights received a certified local government grant from the Ohio History Connection in 2021 to develop a historic preservation master plan for the Warrensville West Cemetery. The Warrensville West Cemetery is located in Shaker Heights. Of course, it's the second oldest burial ground in Cuyahoga County. It is the oldest designated landmark in the city of Shaker Heights. It's just over an acre in size. It's surrounded by tall, dense vegetation and retaining walls and fences, and so the local community isn't super familiar with it, even though it is the oldest designated landmark in the city. The history of the cemetery is closely associated with the early settlement of Warrensville Township, the short life of the North Union Shaker Cemetery, as well as the subsequent 20th century development of the city. The goals of the master plan included creating greater visibility for the cemetery in the community, both physical visibility and sort of cultural visibility, increased use of and improved access to the cemetery, conservation of the historic resources, mostly the tombstones within the cemetery, creating a sort of a branding for the cemetery, as well as historic interpretation opportunities, and landscape enhancements. The project consisted of a series of stakeholder meetings, as well as workshops training local municipal employees and volunteers how to restore tombstones, as well as, of course, an existing conditions survey, which had to happen at the beginning before anything else could. Not going to move forward?
Oh, it should just on the.
Yeah.
I had it doing it just a moment ago. Sorry, there's always a technical.
Yep.
Let me see for a moment here. I think.
I'm just not pressing it hard enough.
I don't know. I'm not used to it in that mode. But, oh, shoot, sorry. It did just a moment ago. That is so weird. Well, where'd the mouse go? It's like moving across 3 different screens here.
Yeah.
Why won't it? I know. I know how to fix this. Hold on one moment. Set up the slideshow. Why won't it let me do that? That's really weird. All right, we've hit our first snag for the day. So it's something about presenter mode. One moment, let me. Why won't it advance?
Because you're gonna have to.
Of historic cemeteries. Tamara has been conserving and restoring gravestones for over 20 years following the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines. The stuff that was visible on the ground surface, as well as the GPR results. The orange dots here represent the headstones, or partial headstones in many cases, that are still visible above ground. The shaded rectangles are the grave shafts that showed up on the GPR. And as you can see here, there's a large area in the southeastern corner that appears to be a very large excavation and may in fact be a mass grave. That's not confirmed, but it appears that's what it appears possibly to be. Obstructed by trees or bushes or other such things. And then in some areas where there were a lot of burials, a 1 foot grid was used. And then, so in addition to the GPR, as I already mentioned, everything that was visible on the surface was mapped using a Trimble Geo 7X sub-centimeter global navigation survey system with a Zephyr 3 antenna. Kate got the fun job of GPSing everything that was on the surface. Tamara there is in the picture on the left. She took photographs and assessed the condition of all of the visible stones within the cemetery. In total, there were 170 visible tombstones or fragments of tombstones that were identified and assessed. Each stone was checked for its stability and its condition. Notations were made on whether it was leaning or tilted, broken or fallen, whether they had been previously repaired, what materials were used for those repairs, because oftentimes tombstones are repaired using unsuitable materials that actually cause more harm than good. And then for each stone, individual conservation forms were generated, which also included details about the inscription, if it was legible, the death date, and then a photo of the stone. Most of the monuments in the Warrensville West Cemetery are made from marble or granite, but there are several siltstone tablets and even one zinc marker in the cemetery. In terms of monument types, it's fairly standard distribution of very common monument types, including tablets and bases, die and bases, obelisks, and multi-piece monuments. So this is an example of the kind of data that Tamara was collecting in her assessment when she was taking the photographs and assessing their condition. And for each stone, she assigned a priority for repair. There were 4 tiers. Priority 1 was urgent, needs immediate attention. Priority 2 were stones that need attention, but maybe it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. Priority 3 are stones that are okay at the moment but need some monitoring, and then priority 4 are stones that don't need any attention for the near future at least. Obviously, there were a number of obstacles that had to be worked around during the survey. There were a number of leaning stones, and leaning tombstones are, of course, very, very dangerous. You have to be aware of where you're standing in relation to the stone, make sure that you're not in the fall zone, preferably standing uphill from the stone. Getting crushed by a tombstone is a terrible way to go. There was also, again, this cemetery has been around for about 200 years, and for the last 100 years or so, it hasn't been very well maintained. So there's a lot of overgrown vegetation, a lot of brush, a lot of trees, and many of the stuff has grown up directly around tombstones. So there are tombstones embedded in this vegetation. So here's just some more examples of some of the conditions that were found. On the left, you see a tombstone it's in relatively good condition. It needs to be cleaned a little bit, but it appears to be upright, doesn't need to be reset. And then on the right-hand side, you have the other extreme, a tombstone that desperately needs to be cleaned. It's fallen out of the ground altogether. When it gets put back into the ground, probably about half of what you see there is going to be underground, just to make sure that it's anchored properly. So after doing the initial assessment, then Tamara sort of formalized everything. A separate form was created for every marker or every tombstone that was recorded. And so here you see an example of this. And this is, as you can see, this is a tombstone that is, it's got brush growing up around it. It's in very poor condition. The inscription is unreadable. It's got a lot of biological growth that needs to be cleaned off. And so this was fairly typical of many of the smaller stones in the cemetery. Here's another example, again, similar sort of situation. This is a larger stone, but as you can see, it's started to tilt, so it's going to need to be reset. This one, you can't see it in the photo, but the inscription is still legible. So it's in slightly better condition than the last one. As I mentioned earlier, there were several workshops that were held. The first one was a workshop for city employees from the Department of Public Works and the Planning Department. This workshop started off by collecting information from these workers about how they manage the vegetation in the cemetery, as well as their knowledge of missing or moved stones. During this workshop, Tamara paid particular attention to getting the maintenance workers to understand that they should try to avoid damaging the bases of the tombstones when they mow around them. That was a big problem in this cemetery. She taught them, for example, that it's better to trim before you mow, because that way you can actually see what you're doing and avoid tombstones that sometimes seem to pop up out of nowhere, particularly if they're low to the ground. The second workshop was geared towards local volunteers. This was open to anybody in the Shaker Heights community who wanted to come. It was held on October 23rd, 2001. It was scheduled for 4 hours, but everybody was having so much fun that they extended it for an extra hour so that they could finish the work of cleaning and repairing some of the headstones. The session began with the classroom overview, followed by a field demonstration and hands-on experience cleaning and doing minor repairs to some of the headstones. In total, 15 stones were cleaned and 8 stones were reset. This included a demonstration of the use of a tripod to reset a particularly heavy stone, but that kind of work really should be done by somebody who is a trained professional and has a lot of experience doing it. Now, I should note that these photos are not actually from the Warrensville Cemetery. They are from other work that Tamara has done, but they're just as an illustration. The tombstone on the left is a before and after photo. For cleaning tombstones, what you really want to use is this cleaning solution called D2. And so you can see beforehand, the stone was in terrible condition, covered in biological growth. But D2, once you apply it and once you clean the headstone, it keeps the biological growth off for years afterward. So conservation treatments employed by the volunteers during the workshop included cleaning and treating biological growth with D2, as well as, again, learning how to reset the fallen stones. All right, so that brings us to the landscape and amenities plan. Once all the existing conditions have been recorded and the workshops had been held, that's when our landscape architects and graphic designers came in to help sort of develop a plan for making this cemetery more a part of the living community in Shaker Heights. Part of that involved doing a lot of archival research, of course, understanding the evolution of the cemetery and its landscape over time, its role in the community, and how that had changed. Thanks. So then they took the existing conditions, they mapped all those, they overlaid them with some various proposals for ways to sort of update the cemetery, make the landscape more inviting and a better place for visitors. Some of the ideas that were discussed included, of course, resetting the leaning monuments to avoid injury to any visitors, removing the many invasive species of plants that have come into the cemetery, pruning the overgrown trees and shrubs, removing the south and east hedgerows to improve visibility of the cemetery from the outside. As you can see here, there are a number of elements such as a no parking sign and fencing that have been overtaken by the vegetation. So those need to be removed. In order to meet modern code, new fencing needs to be installed. Those are just some of the things that were discussed. But more importantly, one of the biggest recommendations was to allow the existing turf grass in the cemetery to grow more or less year-round, to keep some walking paths mowed so that people can visit, but to let the rest of the cemetery kind of grow wild with native wildflowers, which of course are good for local pollinators, but also more accurately approximate what the cemetery would have looked like in the 19th century, because most cemeteries were not regularly mowed. So there are all sorts of not only natural benefits to this, but again, it's sort of more historically accurate. Some other ideas that were discussed, of course, there's the issue of historical interpretation. So both large format static interpretive signs and smaller signposts with QR codes were discussed. The larger static signs, of course, they're more expensive to produce. They're less likely to be updated once they're installed, but they do provide immediate information for people who don't happen to have cell phones or for those who are just stopping by for a quick visit. The QR codes, on the other hand, they can be installed on smaller signposts. They can be easily updated with new information as it becomes available. And basically the idea is you take your phone, you scan the QR code, and it takes you to a web page that provides you with information specific to that location. So you can see here an example of a QR code for this headstone would lead you to this text, providing you with the information about who was buried there. And I should say the design of the post that the QR code is on was inspired by traditional Shaker built fence posts. All right, I'm going to skip the branding because honestly, I don't know anything about branding. Other than I'll just sort of quickly summarize to say that the pine tree was chosen to be the primary symbol in the branding campaign. Pine trees, of course, symbolize eternal life, immortality, protection, and these are all ideas that were central to the Shaker faith. And so along with this, the goal is to introduce white pine, pitch pine, and Virginia pine, which are all native to Northeast Ohio, back into the cemetery. All right, and then finally, just a closing pitch for the Association for Gravestone Studies. Kate and Tamara originally met at an Association for Gravestone Studies conference over 10 years ago and have had a working relationship ever since. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the AGS, it's an international organization with an interest in the preservation of grave markers of all periods and styles. It has a series of publications, it has an annual conference, it does workshops and exhibits, and it's a great professional association that should be more closely aligned with the archaeological community. I think they want to be. I don't know personally a whole lot of archaeologists who are familiar with it, but it certainly has been good for Kate and Tamara. All right, and that's it. Thank you.
I'll add that as someone who lives in Shaker Heights and went to the workshop, this was a terrific program that was community collaborative at every step, right? There were focus groups that decided on the branding and kind of worked to make it something that everybody collaborated. It's a terrific program, and y'all did a wonderful job, so thank you. I'm a little biased, but thank you.
All right. Give me a moment here. Our next paper this morning is Lance Green, who I don't believe we've met, so I don't know. Oh, there you are. Oh, come on up. I'm going to just take, again, a moment to get out of this. Jamie, I'm going to need your help in a moment. Where'd the mouse go? And use, here we go. Do you want me to download this as PowerPoint, or can you work from it in Google? It will.
I don't know.
I think it should be fine. Sometimes it will mess up some of the formatting, but I think it should look all right if that looks all right to you.
That's fine.
Jamie, can you just get this up on the screen? And there's a laser pointer on the green button, and this should, in theory, advance the slides. Just put this up. There we go. This is my tech person, so I'm gonna hand you that, and it should, once we get it going, give it one quick test, but it should work just fine. The pointer and then the little forward button should forward it. It worked the first time around.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Jamie, do we have to put the mouse back in there? Now you should be able to. Okay, you can hit back. Yep.
All right.
There we go. All right. Thank you.
All right. Great. All right. Good morning. So I want to first start by talking about some of our partners. I started working at the battlefield of Piqua in 2016. I teach at Wright State University, and that was the first year we taught our field school there. And I have been working with Clark County Park District on most of our research has been on George Rogers Clark Park, and so they've been really good partners. In 2019, I started working with Chris Thompson and Kevin Nolan from Ball State University, and that's when we got the first of 2 American Battlefield Protection Program grants, and that sort of enlarged the project that we worked on, right? We started working outside of the park boundaries. I'd also like to thank the 3 federally recognized Shawnee tribes. We've worked with them for several years now, and they've been very supportive. They've reviewed our grant proposals and things like that, so they've been great partners to work with as well. All right, so just a little bit of background before I talk about the archaeology. The site of Piqua, or Peckaway, and you could, oh, nope, wrong button. Yeah, right there. In what will become the state of Ohio, of course, this is at the time in 1780, part of the British province of Quebec. Piqua was settled by the mid-1760s by the Shawnee. By 1780, it's one of the largest Shawnee towns in the region. Probably 1,000 people or more are living there. So this is a substantial town. It was attacked in August of 1780 by American militia led by George Rogers Clark. And of course, Clark's idea was to push into Quebec to destabilize British forts and of course Native Americans who are allied with the British. And also, of course, to push Shawnee to the northwest away from the Ohio River for Americans to begin crossing the Ohio River and settling that territory. If you're interested in the history of the battle, this is a page I grabbed from John Winkler's book published a few years ago on the Peckaway battlefield. And he scoured all the historic sources that we know of. There are a series of maps that show what we know about the strategic movements across the battlefield. So it's a really good source. All right, so we do have some sort of background information about what happened at the battlefield, at least sort of the large sort of movements that were happening. We know this because George Rogers Clark and several other officers wrote a lot in their journals and in correspondence about what happened on the battlefield. So we know, for example, that you know they arrived on August 8th of 1780. They had landed in Cincinnati and traveled all the way through Chillicothe Old Town, which is at Xenia right now, and then on to the town of Piqua. And this is, let me see if I can get my pointer. This is the Mad River. So the site is located just on the north side of the Mad River, about 15 miles east of Dayton. about 3 or 4 miles west of Springfield. And so we know, for example, Clark writes in his journal that they crossed the entire force, stopped at the Mad River and crossed on a shallows, but he divided his force into 3 groups. One group went to downriver to the west to flank the Shawnee. One group, led by Colonel Logan, and that was most of their cavalry force, moved to the northeast up the Mad River, and their plan was to cross the Mad River and then scale a series of limestone bluffs and surround, come on the right flank and come in behind the Shawnee so they couldn't escape. And unfortunately for Logan's men, they couldn't get their cavalry, they couldn't get their horses across the river or across the bluffs, and so that plan kind of fell apart, and that becomes the reason why the Shawnee actually were able to escape the battle, right? It actually, for most of the day, was a pretty evenly pitched battle. There were skirmishes and fighting across a large area, and I'll talk about the size of the battlefield in a minute. But what turned the tide in Clark's favor was that he brought 2 cannons with him, and he was able to get them up on an elevated area and started bombarding this triangular wooden palisaded fort that the Shawnee had built, and started bombing houses in the town. And the Shawnee knew at that point that the battle was over, and so they escaped, and they could escape because Logan's forces had failed to surround them. All right, so this is a topo map of the area. So again, you can see the Mad River here. The red line is the original National Register boundary of the battlefield, right? And the National Register, the site, officially Pickaway Settlements Battle Site, or Pickwa Battlefield, was placed on the National Register in the late 1970s. And at the time, that red line, the boundary of the site, includes about 700 acres. And this is one of the main things that we're interested in with the ABPP survey, is to define the boundaries of the site. The blue boundary is the Clark County Park District boundary. And so when we started doing the field school, of course, we were working just within the park boundary. And so we were working in this area trying to locate areas of the battlefield. And so we started down here, which is a lower floodplain of the valley of the Mad River. And then later years, we started working in these sort of elevated areas up on a bluff that I'll show you in a minute. So for the field school, we had a few goals. The research goals were both to identify areas of the battlefield, to identify integrity of the battlefield, but also I was interested in looking at the Shawnee town itself. You know, this was a substantial Shawnee town. It was occupied for 15 years or more, and to my knowledge, there are very few, if any, professionally excavated Shawnee towns or components from the 18th century. So I was and continue to be very interested in this. We've had much more luck identifying evidence of the battlefield than we have of the town, unfortunately, of architecture, of settlement pattern, anything like that. All right, so the first year, field school, summer 2016. Like I said, we were working down in the floodplain, and if you're familiar with this area, it's right behind the Davidson Interpretive Center, which is part of the park. This is 33 CL 275. It's about a 30-acre field that was recorded originally by Stan Baker. This area was also surveyed back in the early 1990s by Tony DeRegnacourt in preparation for construction of a subdivision called Shawnee Subdivision. And during that excavation, they found a lot of material related to the town, including cut silver jewelry and other kinds of material that were closely connected to Shawnee life. Here they are carrying out shovel test excavations. And so there we were doing 10-meter shovel test intervals across the site. We also did metal detector survey, and almost immediately began finding a lot of battle-related material, mostly musket balls, fired, unfired musket balls, cut musket balls, different calibers from the low 30s up to the 69 caliber ball, which I think is related to the British Brown Bess. A lot of gun hardware, including this fragment on top of a brass butt plate fragment with, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a bow and arrow and quiver design, which the British were manufacturing and selling in North America, specifically to Native American groups. And so 2017, we began sort of migrating up into the higher elevations onto this bluff. And so this is an aerial photograph, I think, that Jared Burks shot with his drone. He did some magnetometer survey and some GPR out there. And so this is facing sort of to the southwest. The Mad River is right behind the highway. This is the floodplain area. And then this is the elevated sort of bluff area that we've been working in the last few years. And this big white house is the Hertzler House, which was built in the 1850s. And so this is one of the challenges we've had, is that we have multiple historic components. We have the Piqua Town from the 1770s, we have an early farmstead from the 1820s, and then the Hertzler House from the 1850s. And so sometimes separating out those different historic components on site has been really sort of a challenge. In the bottom left, this is, we continued our shovel test excavations up on this bluff area, and you can see in the back the statue of George Rogers Clark. So this is Clark County on George Rogers Clark Park, and we're working around Clark statue. So there's a lot of Clark stuff happening in the county there. This is in Clark County. So again, in this area, we continue to find a lot of material, a lot of lock parts like this mainspring. We found, things like this brass ramrod tailpipe from a musket. Unfortunately, it was severed during shovel testing, but we recovered both pieces. And then in the top right, we got some gunflint fragments, including this French gunflint fragment. And this is sort of a cautionary tale for us working there. This is actually a whole gunflint, but the George Rogers Clark Park hosts every summer the New Boston Fair. If you're not familiar with it, this is sort of a big reenactors fair. It's really popular. There are 10 or 15,000 people come every year. They have reenacting from the late 19th or late 18th, early 19th centuries. They have vendors. People actually camp out on site, right? And so this gunflint on the right, I bought a couple years ago for like $3, right? And so I didn't know until I started working here that the reproduction folks are serious about reproducing this stuff, right? Musket balls, gun flints, gun parts, everything from brass cups and saucers, and so all that stuff is sort of laying around on site. And so every time we recover this material, we have to think and be careful that we aren't actually, calling this something from 1780s when it's actually from 2010 or something like that, right? We've also recovered a lot of personal gear, a lot of flat disc buttons, for example, both military and civilian, a lot of personal gear that people were carrying. And again, some of this stuff might date to the late 18th or the early 19th century, but certainly a lot of the battlefield related stuff is from the battle. Back in 2010, 2011, Bob Morris and Jeff Karskadden excavated in the same area. They identified what is the Kiefer cabin. So the Kiefer family moved there in the mid-1820s, established a small farmstead. And so this is in the same area, right? This is the Hertzler house. This is the statue. And then their excavation was right here, right where we worked about 10 years later, or started about 7 or 8 years later. And so they excavated 6 or 7 pit features associated with the Kiefer cabin, recovered thousands of artifacts. So working in this area, our students do shovel test excavations, they do metal detector survey, and also when we, uncover something interesting, they do test unit and sometimes small block excavations and feature excavations. And so this is in the same area, and they opened up a 2x2, identified this rock-filled pit, and to me what was sort of more interesting was this dark, narrow trench. And, if you've done any research on, palisade walls, of course, you dig a trench and you put the post in and then you backfill. And so I had been looking for a narrow trench to identify the location of the fort from the 1770s and 1780. I talked to John Winkler and he thought it was right there on this elevated bluff. And so I had high hopes that we had finally identified the fort. We excavated the pit feature, which was actually sort of a small cellar pit, probably from the Kiefer cabin. And then literally on the last day of the field school, I bisected the trench and uncovered like a plastic coated utility line. So not from 1780, but from 1980, right? They had run electricity from the Hertzler house out to George Rogers Clark statue so they could have a light at night, right? So that was sort of disappointing, but at least we knew, right? At least we settled that that was not the fort. We identified a lot of different kinds of activities in these different site areas, including blacksmithing. So in this area, we recovered a lot of cut iron, a lot of broken tools related to blacksmithing, wrought nails, things like that. And so again, some of this material could be 1780s or 1770s, it could be 1820s. So we're trying to separate out the different layers that we're identifying there. Also, a lot of domestic debris. A lot of ceramics, creamware, pearlware, whiteware, a lot of different decorative styles, a lot of redware, right? And again, redware is really difficult to date. I'm not sure exactly when they started producing redware in Ohio, but it was relatively early. Also, a lot of handmade brick fragments, coal, slag, so a lot of things happening, especially up on that bluff area. And so that's sort of where we continue to work. So I also want to talk about the American Battlefield Protection Program. Of course, this is sponsored by the National Park Service, and through that grant program, you can actually work on battlefields and carry out different kinds of activities. The ultimate goal is to identify and educate and protect these battlefields. The two grants that we have received so far, one in 2019 and one in 2021, were to carry out field work, right? And the goals there were first to identify the boundaries of the battlefield, but then also to talk about integrity, right? How well preserved are these, is this battlefield? And so through the grant program, you have to do a COCOA analysis, right? This military terrain analysis. You have to approach the landscape strategically and look at it from the standpoint of how did the battlefield commanders sort of use the landscape to their advantage. And so things like, obstacles, field of fire, concealment, things like that, we analyze as we're doing the field work. And this will be part of the project reports. And so I wanted to show you a map here talking about the size of the battlefield. And so this is that map I showed you originally. The original National Register boundaries of the battlefield include about 700 acres. And the park is right here, roughly, the center of the park. And that is roughly right here. So, on this Google aerial or whatever, they have the original boundaries just going mostly to the west and to the south. And we, in the last 2 years, we worked a lot on the south side of the Mad River. We worked to the north and to the east. And that red line is roughly right now the current boundary of the battlefield. So we have doubled, almost tripled the geographic size of the battlefield. And I think that everybody, including us, we were surprised at the scale of the geographic scale of the battle. Okay, thanks. So the first year we carried out, excuse me, metal detector, pardon me, metal detector survey, mostly on private land, right? We were working mostly outside of the park. In 2019, Wright State students, we didn't have a field school. We actually just had students, they were hired through the grant program, and so Wright State and Ball State students worked together. We worked on 10-meter intervals and did 1 meter wide metal detector survey sweeps, and then recorded all of our finds with a handheld Trimble unit. Some of the areas were a little bit more wooded, so of course that is more difficult both for sort of traversing the area and for metal detector survey. Again, just like in the field school, we almost everywhere we worked, we identified evidence of the battlefield, mostly musket balls. In some cases, sort of unusual artifacts. This is a few artifacts from this cluster of just over 40 flat disc iron buttons, and I don't know if you can see it. Oh, not like that. But they all have a narrow sort of rectangular slot cut through them, right? So we're still doing some research and trying to figure out exactly what that was. But also, things like fixed blade knives. This one was complete except for the bone or wood handle has rotted away. But you can see, it's got the sort of classic rat tail tang. It's got sort of a hand molded pewter bolster. And then lots of buckles. And a lot of these came from specific site areas on the south side of the river where Clark's men were supposedly, or not Clark, Logan's men, the cavalry units were actually trying to cross the river. And so we think in some cases we've identified the locations where the cavalry were moving through or where they were stationed, because a lot of these buckles not only come from like satchels, smaller artifacts, but also from horse gear, right, from harnesses and things like that. In 2021, last summer, we continued the survey, the ABPP survey, but a lot of it was actually on park land, an area that hadn't been surveyed before. And in that case, last summer, our students actually sort of rotated 2 at a time onto the ABPP survey. So they got to work both in the field school and with the survey crew. Again, we found a lot of material, musket balls, knife parts, buckles, things like this, which is a gun cleaning tool with a pick and a screwdriver, a pretty handy tool in the 18th century. And then this is interesting. At first, I thought this was a sheet of aluminum. There were some 1930s occupations in the area where we were working. This is roughly 5-inch by 3.5-inch sheet of metal. It turns out that it's actually either nickel silver or plated with nickel silver. and it is a piece of a looking glass. And we've done some research, and the Shawnee historians we've talked to have actually been really helpful in this. It's the actual looking glass part of this looking glass that was really popular in the 18th century, especially for a lot of Native American people. And there are records, including this brief quote, where Shawnee men would actually highly prize these. They would trade or purchase these and wear them on their belt, and they would use them in preparation for going into battle or for a ceremony for painting their faces. All right, thank you. So I will stop there, and thank you, and thanks to all of our sponsors and partners.
All right. Our next presentation, hold on, be here. Our next presentation is actually a pre-recorded talk from, let me get the list. So I'll set this up. It'll take me just a moment to get it working. From Cheryl Johnson, who I think is here, right? Is Cheryl here? That's all right. Cheryl Johnson, about using human remain detection dogs to find human remains. And we get to see a really cute image of Pocket, the dog, finding human remains. So give me just a moment to get this ready. What's the matter, Jamie? It's cool. All right, so that was the PowerPoint. It should be open. All right, Jamie, can you come get this in the screen? And we have not tried the sound out with this, so once again, everybody cross your fingers. It worked last night when we did this. Where's the mouse? All right, Jamie, can you come here and can you get this in? All right. And you can also turn off the camera for this one because we don't need the webcam on for this. All right, is it ready?
Wait, stop. Look on OBS. Look on the monitor.
Yeah, very good. All right, and I'm gonna hit play.
I don't know if it sounded.
Well, we're gonna all cross our. There's no what. Well, if it doesn't work if you're watching this on the YouTube live and the sound doesn't work, we will make this available afterwards with the sound working. Right, there are a few things that we haven't ironed out, but I'm gonna go ahead and get the play. All right, and this should work. No, I hear the sound, but not where it's supposed to come out. Uh-oh.
That's my iPad.
Why don't we hear it here? Hold on. No. All right, how did we do this last night when we had the sound working? It just played, right? Oh, can we make it stop here? I think it's still playing on the YouTube. Hang on. All right, so here's where one of these moments where we did not.
Jamie, is the laptop muted in OBS?
What is this?
Well, it's
I don't
not
want...
even coming through on the speakers.
No, I could hear it. It's coming out. The sound was coming only on the YouTube.
No, that was you talking.
Oh, okay. All right. So hold on one moment and we will figure this out. And if it doesn't, we will either play this separately or we will make it available after the fact. But it was really cool. Everybody wants to see Pocket the dog finding. It's really great.
No. Not microphones.
I'm not sad they're watching on the Zoom.
Output. So speaker USB.
This is
What are those?
Creston.
So on OBS, it says the mic auxiliary is muted. Do we need to unmute something? No. Like everything is muted except it's really good.
So we can just change. Can I just mess around with that real quick?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
But we want
Coming
it.
through on those.
Try those.
Because that's the name I think of.
Yeah, try that one.
That one?
Yeah, the Kristen. Right, hit play again and see.
If not, you can just play it super loudly on your
No,
laptop.
people in the back won't be able to hear from the laptop. It worked beautifully last night.
There.
Okay,
Oh, there she is.
Stop.
okay. Is that, wait, if we turn up any further? Okay, now. Is there a volume on the wall? There we go.
Faculty at University of Cincinnati.
Oh,
As many of us have experienced,
would he breathe?
this is especially true of prehistoric sites. In order to accomplish this, we normally Jennifer Jordan Hall would on this slide you see Jennifer. I want to explain how she's done that. The large green scroll-like area are ethnic. Makes up 40% of a dog's nose. This difference is important because when a dog's this dog,
I don't know why it keeps doing that.
people often think of certain dog
Cuts in and
breeds
out.
as So all three of these dogs pictured here. Not all dogs can detect human remains because they're so. Think of it over the span of decomposition. There are 5 different stages. This is Canine Pocket. She's a 9-year-old Parson Russell Terrier. I'll show you a couple of videos. The first, change in behavior. Jennifer had no idea she was being filmed. Previously mentioned, the archaeological site is 11 human burials and 4 historical remains detection dog survey. So as you would expect, disruptions of these soils. Here's a comparison of historical remains. Shows close correspondence, really clusters, were to about 2.5 meters, which was not throughout the back dirt indications. Sometimes we have indications and we're unable to find. It's also very important to understand that we had to work on segregating and labeling.
There we go. We had that was well. They'll tell. I was just texting with Cheryl. We didn't open up the Zoom link. We had too many things going on. Cheryl had wanted to be here to answer some questions. So what I can do is put you in touch with her and share her information so that you can get in touch if you think that this is something that you'd like to learn more about. And who doesn't want to meet Pocket the dog, right? I love that. We are going to take a 10-minute break now. I am to set up. We have two virtual presenters who I'm going to log in with Zoom, and we'll get them set up. So take a moment, use the restroom. We'll start probably just a shade after 11 o'clock, and then we'll have 3 more papers, and then we'll go for lunch. So we're going to stop the YouTube broadcast for a moment too while we get this ready. So Jamie, can you help me do that? Jamie.